Meghan Sapp is a type of person who, when driving down the road and sees cows in a feedlot on the left and a corn crop on the right, thinks, "What the f?" Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of What the Field. Today we're super excited to be speaking with Meghan Sapp from the Hub del Norte and the Savory Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're all very excited. So we've already done a bit of chit-chat before we started recording, so I think we can just dive right in with the questions, right?
Yeah, great.
Let's go.
Hit me.
Great. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit more about your journey before joining the Hub del Norte? So kind of what led you to this point where you're at now?
Well, gosh. I've always been somehow related into agriculture. I grew up on my grandma's Arabian horse farm in California, in this kind of funny semi-urban place where I had a pickup truck and we all dressed like cowboys. And I thought that was normal, even though we were just 45 minutes from San Francisco. And then I went to university in Montana to study livestock management and discovered, oh, those are real cowboys. But it was in my blood. It was stuck. And so even though I wasn't really very interested in like the science part, I was very much interested in the culture and farmers and ensuring that farmers had a future, had a place. So really it was sustainability, but it didn't really have that word way back a long time ago that I don't put numbers to. So that took me on a journey where I went from being an agriculture journalist, first in the US, and then came to Europe when I was 24.
What does an agriculture journalist do at that time?
Well, it was great because I'd go with my dog and my pickup truck and I'd go around and talk to farmers and hear their stories.
Okay.
And I was young enough that they treated me like their granddaughter and they just opened the doors and tell me everything and take pictures and really just try to understand, in innovation or production techniques or, how to deal with diseases. It was really everything from picking carrots with these giant machines that nearly killed me. But I did get an awesome picture that put me on the cover of the magazine. So yay.
It was worth it.
It was worth it, but super scary. But anyway, so everything from production to markets. I didn't really get into markets until I started writing for Dow Jones Wall Street Journal in London. A few years later, I started writing about the global sugar market, and then sugar, coffee, cocoa, all of these. Anyway, it was a very long story. All that was very much about agriculture and writing until I got tired of being a voyeur and decided to do a bit more about it. So became a lobbyist. Can we say that word? Lobbyist? The L word? Yeah. But I was the L word for least developed countries who were trying to change their production and their markets away from sugar production because the EU had changed their policies and no longer wanted their products towards biofuels. So first it was ethanol because you could make that from sugarcane. But then starting to work in that area saw that just the gigantic need for energy access in rural areas, but also value addition, processing, and we really got into everything from food versus fuel to land grabbing to technology transfer, working with entrepreneurs, working with investors, and again, pushing that sustainability piece. So making sure that those companies that were going to be going into Africa to do large-scale development and produce biofuels and more food, that they were doing it in a way that was sensitive to the environment as well as to the communities. So I did that. And then after 8 years of being in Brussels, got burnt out, as you do. Had the opportunity to come to Spain to learn about solar power. I was going to be here for 3 months. So that was in 2010. Still here.
What happened?
I meant to learn about solar power, and I was sent to this itty bitty little company doing all kinds of renewable technologies in the industrial, technology park in Vitoria in the Basque Country. And I just fell in love with it because there was just so much energy with all of these itty bitty little companies all developing technologies and all working together and all collaborating. And when you come from Brussels, the Brussels bubble, where it's just a lot of talk and no do, and you get to a place where it's just so vibrant. Everybody,
action.
yes. Yeah. I was like, okay, I'm going to stay here. Okay. So I did. And then I met my husband. And so I really stayed.
Passion and love.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's when I started changing the model of, okay, well, rather than looking at large-scale biofuels, how can we be integrating small-scale renewables into food production and focusing on waste to energy? Because, of course, there's a lot of organic waste when it comes to food production, no matter really what part of the supply chain you're at. So shifted the focus to there. Then we decided, well, we need to do the demonstration facility because, of course, nobody will believe you until they see it working. Mm-hmm. So we visited 60 farms in the north of Spain, in the Basque region, because that's where my husband was from San Sebastian. And we finally found our place in the north of Navarra 9 years ago. And long story short, we knocked it down, rebuilt it. All energy efficiency, all renewable energy. We're off grid. We produce 95% of our own energy.
And you became a farmer.
And then we became a farmer. Yeah, because we had land. We had 3.5 hectares, and we had horses and a couple chickens, 3 tomatoes, nothing interesting. And then COVID hit. And so my very international 100,000 kilometers flying a year, not very sustainable. Career suddenly came to a halt. Lost about a third of my income because of that, and went, oh crap, what are we gonna do? And then like, oh wait, we have a farm, and so that's when we started producing. That's when we really, we're still very small scale compared to most people, but we scaled up. Mm-hmm. Now we have about 100. Laying chickens, 20 fattening chickens. We do 15 turkeys a year. We have goats. We still have the horses. We have 3 very large dogs, all around 40 kilos. Lots of love. And about 700 square meters of gardens. Okay. So 5 years ago is when we started getting into holistic management. And that really coincided with our explosion in production. So what it did was it allowed us to plan using the holistic management planning methodologies and really be sure about what we were doing, being very purposeful, understanding what the results would be beforehand, before we really would. Do we really want to get ducks? We have 4. Okay, do we really want to go from 3 turkeys to 15? Does this fit with our lifestyle? Does this fit with our holistic context? Does this fit with what we want to be doing? So we very much follow the decision-making processes through holistic management, and honestly, it's changed our lives. And that's what brought us to the hub when we started the hub last year and decided to use our farm, Curly Creek Ranch, as the learning farm, because we'd already been making mistakes on it for 5 years. So, let's show people what we've learned and see what we can do learning together.
So you've been talking the hub, holistic management, and all of this fits within Savory Institute. What is the hub? What is holistic management? Yeah. Who is Alan Savory? What brought you to this holistic management phase?
Yeah, great. Okay, so Alan Savory is a Zimbabwean biologist who, over the past 50 or so years, has been trying to understand how we got to where we are environmentally, socially, and economically. Why is the world desertifying? Why are families worse off now than they were 50 years ago? Where's all the water going? Why are we unhealthy? All of these reasons, right? And so it all comes down to how we manage our resources. It's all about decision making. It's not, we're emitting too much carbon. Yes, that's a problem, but the root cause of that is because we've decided to emit too much carbon. Our soils are not able to produce nutrient-dense food, and we're, unhealthy. Our animals are unhealthy. Our people are unhealthy. We have all of these issues from diabetes to obesity to malnutrition. How are all of these things related? And it comes back down to decision making, right? So it's personal decision making, but also institutions, policy making. So there's a bit of an alignment there with my Brussels life.
Yeah. You know all of the sites now. You can do it.
Yeah, it's exactly. And so it's a decision-making framework. When people talk about holistic management as if it were a kind of regenerative agriculture, and it is and it isn't. There are planning processes, such as holistic plant grazing, or the ecological monitoring that we do that is related to ensuring that we're using our animals in a way, or ensuring that any kind of agricultural production, we're doing it in a way that is leading more towards soil health, right? Okay. But that's only one piece of it. Holistic management being a decision-making process that is focused on our quality of life right now, while we're trying to get to a vision of what we want our environment to be like in 200 years, right? So it's all long-term decision-making instead of the short-term, oh crap, decision-making that is what ends up causing more problems further down.
So this guy in that moment realizes that the way we're thinking and approaching ecosystems overall, not farming specifically, right? Or
So holistic management really can be applied to anyone. It can be applied to a student living in a dormitory, or a family living in a townhouse, or a hairdresser with her little business in a village, because it's, really trying to understand our impact on the world, depending on what we decide. So it can be, do I put 100 cows on this piece of property, or do I put 400 cows on this piece of property? Or is it, I understand where, I think about where the food that I'm buying is coming from, and how those producers are interacting with their land, with their environment, with their employees. Do I want to be supporting one kind of model or another kind of model? Okay. In a sense, it's kind of like butterfly effect, because everything that we do has some kind of impact, right? We may not necessarily see it, but we are still responsible for it. And I think that's one of maybe the scary things about holistic management, is because once you understand that we are really responsible for our decisions, and we live in a society where responsibility has almost been completely eliminated, right? It's like, oh, well, I can't see the child slaves that are making my iPhone, right? So it's not happening, right? Exactly. Yeah. I buy my food at Mercadona because it's cheap. Yeah. I don't understand why it's cheap. Yeah. I want to buy tomatoes from the local farmer, but oh my God, they're €6 a kilo. I was like, well, do you understand why it's €6 a kilo, and why that product is healthier for your body than the tomatoes you're going to buy that are going to go off in 2 days because they've gone through a super long supply chain. They've come from really far away. They've probably been produced with chemicals, so it's really that. So I found holistic management about 5 years ago. I was finishing up my undergraduate degree with my alma mater in the U.S. 20 years later. And one of the courses that they offered was holistic management. What I didn't know at the time was that Alan had taught at my university 30-something years ago, when he was on exile in the U.S., right? Because he had been kicked out of Zimbabwe because the Zimbabwean government didn't like what he had to say. Okay. Right. So, and he had a long history he was a biologist, but, he was also in the military, and he was also a politician, and he was from a very young age trying to get people to understand ecosystem processes. Okay. But how holism works, right? So you guys have probably heard of that movie that won the Oscars, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
That's holistic management. Having an understanding of how everything we do affects everything else, and how we can manage that complexity in our lives.
This involves also social,
Absolutely.
economics?
Social, economic, and environmental.
Okay.
So when we're talking about, I guess we can go back to the regenerative agriculture piece for a second. When we're talking about managing land, being land managers, being land stewards, depending on where we are in the world, it doesn't matter so much how much rain there is, but how often that rain falls, right?
Okay, yeah, of course.
Because if you do anything, in a place where it's not going to rain for the next 6 months, or you do something and it's going to just a little bit of, fog or mist or light rain, more or less most days over the next 6 months, the soil and the microbiology in the soil are going to act differently. Water is the limiting factor of life, right? Yeah. So in an area that is a quote unquote desert or is desertifying or is dry or whatever, there's still probably life in there. It's just on hold until the rain comes, right? Yeah. So it's really understanding how whatever we do can go in a better direction or in a more negative direction. And then making those decisions based on where we're trying to go. There are a lot of rules, right? You must do this. You must not do this. Holistic management isn't like that. Is it within your holistic context or is it not? That's pretty much, there's a number of questions to get there, but it's inside or outside. We don't say you can't use pesticides, but we do say, do you understand what the impact of that pesticide use is going to be on the ecosystem function of the land that you're managing? If you do understand and you're happy to take on those consequences, fine, go ahead. But understand the impact that it's going to have on your property or where you're managing, but also on the property of your neighbors. Are you going to be creating social weak links with your neighbors because you've decided to plow up everything and now the soil can't infiltrate and retain water, and all the water runs off and takes all those chemicals with it onto your neighbor's property? Are you going to have a good relationship with your neighbor after that? Probably
so it's kind
not.
of a transformational tool, like to lead you to understand what will happen when you do it.
Yes.
And not only the positive that we've been told, right? Because when you do something in a certain way, it's probably because you think it's going to give you some benefits and you don't know so much, or you don't want to see the negative part.
Yes.
So is it about showing it, and in the long term also, not in the short term that we used to see it, or?
It's more about making sure that we go through the thought process, and if we don't have enough information, then we don't make a decision until we do have enough information, right? To not be focused on, this is easier, quicker, faster. But really, I want my property to be productive and support my family and be in a position that if my kids wanted to continue with this, that they could. Or if my kids don't want to, that's fine too, but that there would be someone else who could come and take over my property, my project, because it's an economically viable ongoing concern, right? So it's complexity, because it's so much that we have to think about all the time. It's in a way, it's kind of like opening up a Pandora's box, no? Okay. Because it's just so much easier to not have to think about these things.
Not caring.
Not caring.
Yeah.
Not caring about the impacts that what you do has on your neighbor or on your community or on what companies decide to produce, right? Because companies decide to produce based on market demand.
Yeah.
Right? So if there are a lot of producers who would just rather pay someone money to think for them, and they don't really care what the results of those decisions are going to be, well, then we are where we are now.
But then it's based on good intentions of people that in the long term, they want what's best for everyone instead of short term good for me, right?
Exactly. One of these big words associated with regenerative agriculture is reductionist thinking, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, that's reductionist. Oh, that's reductionist. But what does reductionist mean? When you take a decision that is reductionist rather than holistic, that means you are trying to solve an immediate problem, need, or want, right? It's like, oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to call Deliveroo and have them send me, okay, fine, great. But what's the impact of that decision, right? I have this problem. I've got a insect plague in my crops. I'm just going to spray it with pesticide and get rid of the problem. Well, actually, no, because you're not looking at the root cause of the problem, right? Why are those pests coming and eating up your crops? Is it because the crops are weak? Because it's a monoculture? Because it's all annuals? Because there's no relationship with the microbiology in the soil that would then make the plants stronger? What's going on that is causing this problem? We know that insects, disease, plagues, whatever, affect organisms. So whether it's humans or whether it's animals or plants, they attack the weak, right? Because basically, these diseases or pests or whatever are the rubbish bins of nature, right? Yeah. They are just trying to cycle those nutrients back into the soil or back into the environment as quickly as possible so that a stronger being of whatever kind has access to those nutrients, right? So if we're ill, right, well, it's more efficient for the environment that we die as quickly as possible so that we can get those nutrients back available to whoever needs them as soon as possible, right? Okay. But same thing with crops. Same things with livestock, right? So if you're making sure that you've got healthy soil where all of the ecosystem processes are working, that healthy soil is going to create healthy plants. Those healthy plants are going to create healthy animals and healthy humans. And then it all folds in together, right? So how can we be making those decisions to get to where those are? We don't focus on the short-term immediate need, making reductionist decisions, focusing just on technology that's going to, this is a really cool drone thing, or this is a really cool app, or this is a really cool... It could be even, biologically based inputs. It's not just chemicals are bad, right? Biologically based inputs. But if you're not solving what the root cause of this problem is, it doesn't matter what you throw at it. It's just going to keep happening. Yeah. So it's like, okay, let's peel back the layers. Let's get the whys. Yeah. Why?
Okay. I really like this idea of focusing on decision-making process and all of that. So do the hubs focus more on that with the farmers? Is it more like a theoretical learning, or is it also a sort of practical, on the ground, this is what's happening training as well?
So back to what's a hub. Yeah, no. Thank you for that, because me puedo liar muy fácil. I can go off on a tangent. So Alan came up with his base of knowledge, which is universally applicable, but in order for there to be uptake around the world, for it to be uptake locally, it needs to be translated not just in the language, but in culture to local areas, right? And that's the responsibility of the hubs. So we help our local communities, and that local can be national, it can be regional, it can be around the corner, whatever, right? So as hubs, it's our responsibility to translate that universal knowledge to something that makes sense on the ground where we are working. So we as Hub del Norte work in the northern third, whatever, of the Iberian Peninsula and north of the Pyrenees, so southern France, right? We typically refer to it as the green part of Spain, right? There's another hub, Alihab, which has been around since 2016, and they work predominantly in the dehesa, right? So in the woodland, drier, we call it more brittle areas, places where the water distribution throughout the year is a bit more extreme. Whereas in the north, if you do something that you would have done in the south, it'll have a completely different result, right? So the decision making is the same, but the results are different. So what we're trying to do is help people up in the north who have different contexts to understand how to apply the knowledge and the decision making that comes with holistic management. So we do that through training. We do some online training, but I'm really much more in favor of in-person on the ground training in different parts of the country, so that we're really able to be as local and specific as possible. And next year, 2024, we're very excited. We're going to be launching our advisory program. So there will be a select number of farms who will get hand-holding in addition to training. And then we also do ecological monitoring using the ecological outcome verification methodology that Savory community has been developing for more than 20 years. There's about 5 million hectares around the world who have been verified, had their data verified, and are, understanding how the management decisions they're taking are leading towards improving their soil and their ecosystem function, or going in the wrong direction and understanding why, if that's what's happening. So this year was our first year with EOV monitoring. We did monitoring on 7 farms. We will be doing monitoring on those same 7 farms next year. And if we're lucky, we get some more funding, there will be more farms that we do baselining on next year. But our big focus has been on training. We did training this year with some farmers or producers in La Rioja, Catalonia, and at our place on our farm in Navarra. Next year, we're getting ready to finalize, announce, whatever. But we'll be doing it in the Costa Cantabrica, so along the Cantabrian coast. Probably in Aragon, probably in Avila. Definitely at the ranch a couple times. And for those interested, we will be doing it in English this summer. So you come spend your summer holidays with us doing holistic management at the ranch. And then maybe a couple others as well. And then so it's really exciting because there's so much interest and demand in regenerative agriculture all of a sudden. It's like, okay, great. So we need to get out there and teach as many people as possible. But we're also just a couple people. And so we need to be training not just producers, but also trainers. So we need technicals, please.
And on that, like, there's so much demand and interest. We're seeing big demand or a lot of talk around regenerative in big companies, maybe, or at European level, big organizations. But what type of farmers go to you for advice or for trainings? Because that's not easy to come through. Yeah.
So hashtag stop greenwashing. That's a big one for us. And something that I had called out to the global, because I had come from this world of soft commodities, right? Yeah. So I was trying to leverage my relationships and my network in the world of soft commodities, get them to understand that regenerative agriculture is the biggest opportunity, but also their biggest potential risk. Because if they go for greenwashing, it's going to be a reputational risk that they're not going to be able to make up for. So let's all work together and ensure we can get to scale as quickly as possible, but doing it in the right way, right? How do farmers find us? I mean,
not find us, find you, but the farmers that come to you, what do they have in mind?
Oh, what's their driver?
What's the driver?
Okay, so there's usually two drivers. One is the environmental social side. People are already sensitized. They want to do things better. They don't know what better means, but they know that the way that they've always done it or the way that their grandparents taught them isn't working.
Are they kind of conventional? Are they already organic? Are they more like
it's both? It's both.
Animal related or agriculture?
Yeah.
Big, small.
Yeah. So it's so I'd say. Okay, so when we're talking about northern Spain, farms typically are much smaller than they are in the south anyway. So big, small is relative.
Yeah.
You know, we're on 3.5 hectares, which, you know, in the U.S. is a large backyard. But where we are, you know, it's like, wow, you own 3.5 hectares. That's quite a lot. You know, a big farm would be, you know, 70 hectares, including what you lease or comunales, no?
Okay.
So in Catalonia, a big farm is 150 hectares.
Yeah. So
same for maybe Galicia as well. But those are, the size of farms has more of a social historical impact.
Yeah.
But anyway, we won't go down that road. The point is, small, big, it doesn't really matter.
sometimes it's more about the income they get from that farm, more big or small, right?
Yeah, I think it more has to do with where, you know, that someone has taken a decision that they want to do things differently.
Okay.
They want to do it differently because of social environmental reasons, or they want to do it for economic reasons. Okay. They can no longer afford to keep farming the way that they have with all of the pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, anti-parasite, all the chemicals, antibiotics. It doesn't work anymore because they've destroyed their soil, because they've destroyed their ecosystem.
It just doesn't grow anymore.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. Like the costs keep going up and their income keeps going down.
Okay.
So that's really where it is. You either come from a more, you know, green kind of direction, or you come from a green as in dollars and cents, euros and pennies.
Yeah.
This isn't working anymore.
Like more like desperate, I need to do something, or my business going.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And just out of curiosity, is it always in that direction of farmers coming to you, or have you guys ever also kind of reached out to farmers, or maybe, you know, gone looking for them?
So I have reached out to farmers. I have had discussions with farmers where they give you the side eye and they're like, you crazy lady. There is no way that I can continue farming, not lose the farm, if I do all these things that you're talking about. And really, it's all about the mindset, right? And it's like, okay, well, how about we do a safe to fail trial on 5% or 5 hectares or whatever. Let's see how this kind of decision making, this kind of management changes your productivity, your costs, this whole sort of thing, and then see your quality of life, which is key. Farmers and producers never talk about quality of life because we have this idea that, you know, it is our moral responsibility to feed the world, and so therefore we must suffer and die in the process. Not true, but we can come back to that. So it's okay. Well, let's do the safe to fail trial, and then what we find is that, you know, after the first year, it's a pretty drastic change, and they're like, okay, well, let me try a little bit more, and then usually by like the third year, they're like, okay, let's go. Or there are others who are like, you know, I'm at the end of my rope. I have no more money to buy more inputs. So what can I do with what I've got? And that's where holistic financial planning comes in. You know, we focus on planning for profit before our costs, right?
Okay.
All of us as human beings have the capacity to spend every penny we make and more. No, we get a raise. It's like, yay, an extra 5,500, 5,000. Well, that's gone out the window, and I probably got debt coming out the wazoo too, right? So how about let's, again, take responsibility for our decisions, decide what we want to be taking home, decide what we want to be saving for. I need, I want to buy the neighbor's farm when he retires in 3 years, or I want to send my kids to university, or I, God forbid, want to go on holiday with my family. So I know how much money I need. This is how much money is left over. Now let's focus on where we can put that money to make sure we get the best result in terms of least amount of effort, least amount of money, and least amount of energy and time, right? So by focusing on that decision making, where to put what money, when, and why, again, it's a mindset issue. It turns around how you're planning your farm, your family, your life. And you're able to finally design the life that you want and deserve instead of just letting life take you, which is what we all do, right? It's like, okay, well, let's take a little bit more control back in our lives, and how can we make this farm operational? How can we make this farm profitable? How can I enjoy what I'm actually doing?
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and this idea of doing like 5% tryout version, has that ever not worked out for farmers?
No.
And then they decide to not do that anymore?
No.
That's never happened.
It's never happened. And what Alan says is that on the, I don't know how many thousands of farms that have been doing holistic management in some way or another over the past 50, 60 years all around the world, that not a single time that someone did holistic planned grazing correctly, not taking shortcuts, correctly, has it failed.
Wow.
Another one that he loves, a story that he loves to tell, is about a young brother and sister farming couple. I think they were in South Africa, but I don't remember exactly, who were at the end of their rope. No more money. It was like a multi-generational family farm, and they had to figure out how to make it work. And so they brought in Alan, and he helped them with the planned grazing, with the financial planning, creating the holistic context for themselves and for the farm. And like, okay, I think he worked for them like a month or something, like really intense. And then off they went and lived their lives. And then a couple years later, Alan found out that they'd sold the farm. And he felt horrible. Just blaming himself, right? I was like, oh, I failed them. I did it wrong. I told them something wrong. But he didn't have contact with them anymore. And so he just kind of had this like hanging over his head. And then a few years later, he ran into them. And he was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I failed you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. This was the best thing ever. Having worked with our holistic context, we discovered that actually neither of us were happy on the farm. Neither of us really wanted to be farming. So you gave us the tools and the way to open our minds to being like, we don't have to have several generations of pressure on our shoulders. This isn't working for us.
Life philosophy change.
Completely. Yeah. So they sold the farm, and then they were off doing whatever they were doing, and they were happy.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. Oh, wait, that's the point? Okay, we can be happy. Yeah. So, my husband and I, we're super happy on the farm. Doesn't mean that everything's great or easy or,
It's life.
It's life.
Yeah.
It's life. But it's a very conscious decision that we made. And since we went from raising the horses, like my grandma told me to and raised me to do, to doing holistic management, I mean, the first year our management costs for the horses came down 80%. It was insane. And then just, every time we decided to add something, take away something, change something, following the decision-making process, we are able to do it in a way that fits with us. And yeah.
And on this whole greenwashing thing, because now what everyone's pursuing is like this tag of I'm regenerative, but the goal from what you're saying is being happier, lowering costs, having more benefits, but that is not measurable, or maybe in the balance sheet, but it's not measurable. So when do you call a farmer that he's doing things holistically, or when can they have this tag, be it regenerative or holistic management or whatever? How does it work?
There's a number of things in there, so let's unpack a little bit. What is regenerative and what is regenerative agriculture? There are 5 principles that pretty much is agreed upon. Is that reducing or eliminating tillage, ensuring that there are living roots in the soil for as long as possible, reducing or eliminating chemical inputs, maybe not integration of livestock. That's questionable. What we've found is that you can probably regenerate land without integrating livestock. It's just going to be a lot slower.
Okay.
Right? And so, yeah, there's maybe one or two more you can throw in there. But that's kind of like the bottom line. Then you've got whether or not you are or are not. The Spanish National Association for Agriculture, Regenerative Agriculture, la Asociación de Agricultura Regenerativa, had a 2-year consultative process with leading regenerative farmers in the Iberian Peninsula, where altogether they outlined what is and what is not, right? And so that's published on the website, agriculturaregenerativa.es, in both Spanish and in English, where very clearly outlines what is and what is not. So for us, at least in the Iberian Peninsula, we're clear on what it is. Based on that, there are about 90 farms that have complied with this. It's not a certification scheme. There's no auditing. The way that it works is that you need to have at least 2 other people who are in the map say, this guy knows what he's doing and he's following these criteria.
Okay.
So it's very much a peer community kind of infrastructure. So there's that. There are some companies that are trying to come up with certification schemes. The problem with certification schemes is that it's ticking boxes, right? Which is pretty much the opposite of regenerative agriculture.
Again, into the practices and not the results, right?
Exactly. Regenerative agriculture is and should be outcomes-based rather than practice-based, right? That goes back to what we were saying before. Maybe you need to burn a field because there's some reason that you need to, but then you need to understand what that means and then how to treat the land after it so that you can start regenerating those ecosystem processes as soon as possible, right? Maybe you do need to throw some glyphosate once on one piece, but understand why, right? And then have a plan for what you're going to do after that intervention. So that's why we really look at outcomes. And that's where EOV, the Ecological Outcome Verification methodology that we use with Savory, is different to a certification scheme because we are measuring ecosystem processes. They are tuned to the ecoregion, so it's different here in Madrid or in the Sierra than it would be in Navarra than it would be in Uruguay. Okay. So it's tuned, and then it's comparing a farm to itself, not to others, right? So it's a constant improvement kind of thing. So the idea is that through your management, understanding how what you're doing affects the land, you will do it better over time, right? Normally, people who don't plan on doing better over time they wouldn't spend the money on doing the environmental monitoring, right? But what happens is once you've got at least 2 years, so the baseline and the next year, showing that you're getting better, for those who are looking for not a certificate but a seal, then they can participate in the Land to Market program, which the Savory community has, which then works with big brands who are trying to include regenerative products into their supply chains, can then be working together so they can mix, match, pair up, speed dating kind of thing, get the two sides working together.
And how do we make this scalable? Because I see like a lot of farms are going your way, like I need to improve. Mm-hmm. Maybe they don't need the EOV because they're small. But how do we make it scalable? If we want really the consumer to be able to choose a farm that is doing not just trusting their story, that's great, but also seeing the data behind that, but they're maybe a smaller farmer, maybe they cannot pay those amounts. Is there going to be a point where the EOV or this kind of monitoring processes that we see different ones are scalable so that every farmer can access this?
So that's where we work with companies, brands, governments as well to subsidize the cost, right? Because we don't believe that financial burden should be on the producer, especially when they're small. But in general, it shouldn't be on the producer. It should be on the consumer, of showing that what they're doing is beneficial to the environment, right? We always make sure that the producer pays something, because if you don't pay for something, you don't value it, right? But we make sure that it's a price that reflects their capacity to pay and the value that they're getting from a huge amount of information. So how do we scale? Honestly, the bottleneck is financial, making sure that there's always some sort of entity who's going to be paying for this environmental monitoring, the EOV monitoring, but it's also having enough monitors. This was only the second year that EOV was done in Spain. So we have trained up more monitors in the north, more monitors in the south, but, there's the potential that we need to do 50 farms next year. We don't have monitors to do 50 farms. A baseline is 3 days plus travel, plus doing map work beforehand, plus doing inputting data into the platform and the analysis and the report for the farmers after. It's a lot of work. So the way we're able to do that now in these early stages is bring in EOV monitors from around the world. So that allows us to fill a short-term need, but also to train up people so that we have those monitors available. We're currently discussing, we're in the early stages, but we're currently discussing with a major, what do they call those? Certification company that does, like, for organic certification, these sort of things. They already know how to do some kind of these sort of monitoring. So, and they already have huge teams, right? And global teams.
Yep.
So whereas at the moment we're like, finding 1 or 5 or 7 people, who have the background, who have the interest, if we're able to do that same training, but to a team of 100 or a team of 200, and be able to then deploy those monitors around the world, or just in the Spanish-speaking world or wherever, that's going to help us be able to scale up very quickly.
I have just one last question, and then I'm going to lose Amelia because we're super past time.
I do that.
That's great.
It's so interesting.
Great. Yes.
It's amazing.
Just one last one.
No, please.
How does all of this coexist with organic?
So organic. How to be politically correct? Okay, so
don't need to.
I don't have to be political. Okay, well, great. Organic came up from the need to do things differently and do things better, right? But it didn't necessarily come with a mindset change. So you will find a lot, not all, but a lot of organic producers are producing like conventional, but just with lesser different chemicals. They still have bare ground. They still have water infiltration problems. They still don't have the biodiversity. They still don't have the microbiology in the soil, right? So although when the organic movement began more than 50 years ago, what they thought of is what we now think of as regenerative. So the outcomes were envisioned the same, but when you codify something, right? So you turn this concept of organic into law, and then you have a whole industry of auditors behind it, it becomes something that needs to be simplified, and that's where you get practice-based and ticking boxes and not changing mindset. So really regenerative is all about changing that mindset. How can we be focused on soil health, improving the food, the quality and the nutrient density of the food that we're producing at a lower cost, working with nature rather than against her.
So, sorry, really, another last question. Is there a space for laws or, a legal support for regenerative agriculture, or do you think it should be separate?
How do you legislate the way you think? That for me is the big key. Regenerative agriculture is so much more than, no-till or cover crops or, biological inputs or working with the soil cycle, but it's so much more than that. It's the way we think. It's the way we try to find solutions. It's the way we try to work with nature, right? And so I think if we try to codify that, then we're just going to kill the spirit and the essence of it. We do need to agree more or less what we're talking about. And I think that the Spanish National Association has done an excellent job starting that conversation. It's probably something that will evolve over time, as everything does, as nature does, as we do. But I think it's definitely a great place to start, and we shouldn't allow it to go below there. Right?
Yeah. And also we've talked a lot about this mindset change for the farmers, which is obviously essential, but also how does that work for the consumers? As consumers, how do we work in that holistic way as well of decision making?
No, absolutely. Again, it comes back to responsibility, right? So, people want the best life, quality of life, nutrition for their families. I mean, that's kind of basic. Otherwise, why would you have a family? But we have allowed society to run away with us, and we put our priorities on perhaps things that aren't in our best interest, right? So cheap clothes, cheap food, expensive phones, expensive holidays, right? So maybe if we think more about our bodies as a temple, what we're putting into our bodies, that's also very selfish, right? I want to make sure that I'm putting the highest quality fuel, the highest quality food into my body so that I am healthy. But at the same time, it's we need to appreciate the ecosystem services, the way that food is being produced in a positive or in a negative way. Because I can be healthy, but if the world around me is burning down, it doesn't matter, right? So I think there needs to be a much closer connection, if not physically, then at least emotionally and mentally between consumers and their food. And if you make it consumers and the people who produce their food, and you've got that human-to-human relationship, very much like you guys are doing with crowd farming, making sure that people humanize where their food comes from instead of it being this long international supply chain where they have no idea where that food came from. Then if we're able to have that relationship and they know, okay, so maybe I'm paying a little bit more. Maybe I'm not. But maybe I'm paying a little bit more to buy from someone locally, right? And this is also a big question. Is it better to buy a regenerative product from somebody on the other side of the country, or is it better to buy from somebody down the road who maybe isn't all the way there on regenerative, but at least they're trying? Well, obviously that's the better option, right? There may not be supply yet of everything that you need yet, which is why online marketplaces are so important. But we also need to be looking at these connections locally and building these relationships.
Yeah.
Totally. I believe, just on that note that you said about crowd farming, I believe that we are trying to bring this person-to-person connection where there's not that connection. But whenever you can support someone and you see and what what can you better trust that what you're seeing and what that person is conveying to you? I think totally that's the way to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we just have 2 last questions. We're taking this ages.
Are we going to talk
the
about
final ones.
transparency or? Yeah, good.
No, I think
The
that-
closing questions, because if not, we're going to go to
Yeah, until
no?
tomorrow.
Yeah.
I would love
We're
to.
going
by
to change
way,
the
but-
water to cocktails.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
totally.
One question that we always like to ask on this podcast, given the name that it has, is what is one fact or something that you've learned on your journey to where you are now that has really made you just think, what the fuck?
Pretty much every day. There's some moment that makes me go, what the fuck? I think the biggest one, okay, when you start understanding holistic management, but more about how the ecosystem processes work, how to read the land, is it working or not? One of our big focuses is on bare ground, right? So like when you're driving down,
What is bare ground?
bare
For everyone
ground.
that is listening
Sorry.
to us that maybe are not so much
bare ground,
Yeah.
any ground that doesn't have plants on it,
Okay.
right? So bare soil, it's just dirt. This is not soil. This is just dirt. It's brown or gray or
It has no
white.
plants on it.
It has no plants on it, right?
Okay.
That means that your water is not infiltrating. It means it's running off. It means that you're not photosynthesizing solar energy. You're not feeding the microbiology in the soil. You are not feeding animals or insects or humans or anywhere else, because this land is just bare, probably dry, cracked, and dying, right?
Okay.
So when you're driving down the highway and you see a field of whatever monocrop, right? Corn, wheat, whatever, and you see these very neat rows with all this bare ground in the middle, and then you see on the other side of the road cows in a feedlot, covered in mud, standing on mud, eating grain.
All grouped.
All
in a
grouped together.
shadow, just
Yeah,
surviving.
just really sad and depressed, all
Yeah.
smushed up in a group together. And that's when I go, the system is broken, right? It's like you literally have the two pieces
Cross the road, please.
across the road, across the road. Please just send the cows to the other side, and then that's a big one.
Yeah, that is a big one.
Yeah.
Great. And last, more kind of lighthearted question as well is what book or podcast or movie or anything that you've seen lately that has really made you reflect, or that you would recommend to us and to our listeners as well?
So for me, the Regenerative Agriculture podcast by John Kempf is like a master's PhD program. Prior to COVID, I spent a lot of time traveling internationally. Now with teaching farmers, I'm in the car a lot. And I swear, I have probably learned more from the people that John interviews, and I look forward to meeting him someday, that John interviews, than anything else. And it's just, it opens up a whole world of connection and understanding, and seeing how the different pieces all work together. A lot of his speakers are focused more on agriculture, which is important. We've talked mostly about livestock, but regenerative agriculture is key for crop production, food production, on a more non-livestock basis. And there's just so many aha moments. I mean, I'm literally just driving down the road going, oh my God, seriously? And it's just, yeah. So anybody who can understand English, please listen to John.
We'll check it out for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could honestly go on for hours and hours and hours. So thank you so much
Very kind.
for being here.
We need to make episode 2. Because, it's been, we have a lot of questions in the list that we can go
Yeah,
to.
absolutely. Hopefully we can do that. But for now, I think we'll leave it there. And again, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
No, thank you, ladies. This has been great.
Thank you, Meghan.
Okay, bye.
Bye.